In this week's Torah portion, we encounter what's the greatest dissent, the greatest challenge to Moses' leadership in the Torah. When someone rises up, questions Moses' authority, and vies for the mantle of leadership himself, and that is Korach. The interesting thing about it, though, is that on the face of it, Korach's challenge to Moses seems benign, rational, perhaps even sensitive. Rav lachem ki kol eda kulam keroshim uvtocham Adonai. This is too much, for all the community are holy, and God is in their midst. In other words, Moses, my cousin, they were cousins. Everyone here can commune with God. It should be like a democratic process as to who's leader. You alone can't be our leader. After all, what makes you so special? I mean, you're the only human on earth who talks to God panim el panim, face to face. But other than that, what's so special about you, Moses? We could all be like Moses, says Korach, especially me. Rabbis and scholars across generations see through Korach's attempts to unseat Moses as self-centered. They call out his ego, his selfishness, his greed and jealousy. Of course, God sees through it too and punishes him as the earth literally swallows him and all of his followers. But like Korach, whose argument on the face appears selfless, isn't that how all self-possessed usurpers present themselves? As though they care about others more than themselves and their own agenda? Anti-Semitism is kind of like that too. This shape-shifting conspiracy theory often presents as though it's an effort toward the betterment of society, of human rights and social justice, of human dignity for all, when really beneath the surface, it just delegitimizes Jewish existence, demonizes us, and subjects us to double standards. As Rabbi David Wolpe wrote what he saw on Harvard's campus following October 7th, he said, "The one thing the anti-Semite is sure of, whether marching at a Klan rally or just hanging out on campus, there is a good reason. They would never hate Jews just because they're Jews." I've been thinking about this aspect of anti-Semitism, how it can front as though it's not really Jew hatred, but instead presents itself as a righteous crusade for social progress, since I watched a wonderful debate over the question, is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? The debaters included British journalist Douglas Murray with his debate partner Natasha Hausdorff. Anybody see this, by the way?
Yes.
A couple people saw it. She's an international legal expert arguing that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Their opponents were the former MSNBC host Mehdi Hassan and his debate partner, Israeli journalist Gideon Levy, who argue that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Lest you be left with a cliffhanger, when the 3,000 people in Toronto who attended the debate were polled at its conclusion, 69% sided with Douglas Murray and Natasha Hausdorff that anti-Zionism is indeed anti-Semitism. But one of the more difficult things about the debate that Mehdi Hassan kept bringing up was basically this argument. How can anti-Zionism be anti-Semitic when so many Jews are anti-Zionists? Just look at the groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, or If Not Now, or Rabbis for Ceasefire. Look at the ultra-Orthodox sects like Neturei Karta and the Satmar Hasidim, who are explicitly anti-Zionist. And even look at Hassan's debate partner, Gideon Levy, an Israeli journalist for Haaretz. It's an important question. What do we think about that? Can Jews be anti-Semites, or at least participate in anti-Semitism? How do we understand Jewish anti-Zionists? We've all heard about or know Jews speaking out against Israel, espousing anti-Zionism. And I don't mean criticizing its politicians and policies. Criticizing Israel is not anti-Zionism. And this seems to get muddied in the discussion. I mean delegitimizing its existence, calling 1948 a crime, comparing Israeli Jews to Nazis, the war effort to genocide, and accusing Israel of apartheid. And some of the people we see saying these things emphasize that they are saying it particularly as Jews. Some are in Hollywood, some are academics, poets, journalists, some are rabbis. And they begin their point with the phrase, as a Jew, or here's another one. My parents or grandparents were in the Holocaust, and so, and they begin with these disclaimers to give them license to say whatever the next ignorant and ridiculous thing they're about to say. Personally, I want to scream. Take that phrase out of your mouth. Don't you dare act as though you get to speak on behalf of all Jews, that you know better than other Jews. In fact, as a Jew, I'm a professional Jew, I can tell you with great authority that many Jews, from ultra-Orthodox to Reform to secular, as well as Israelis, are ignorant on all sorts of Jewish topics and speak of which they do not know. And dare I say, this even includes some who use the title rabbi, which frankly embarrasses me. And so today, I want to take a few minutes to understand that Jews have participated in various forms of anti-Semitism throughout history. It didn't start in the 20th century, in the 21st century. Now, I wouldn't say that what Korach did was anti-Semitism, but he did put his own interests above the welfare of the whole community. Korach generates disunity and conflict by putting his personal agenda front and center on the national stage. Again, that's not anti-Semitism per se, but it does ring of the same kind of personal pronouncements, putting one's own agenda on the national stage against Israel, like the film director Jonathan Glazer when he won the Oscar for Best International Film this year. I don't know if you saw this. He gave the As a Jew speech. Or like when actress Cynthia Nixon says, as a mother of Jewish children, and then goes on to denounce Israel and Jews. Now, the As a Jew protestation is not necessarily anti-Semitic, but it definitely can go there. Consider the As a Jew OG, the godfather of As a Jewisms, the academic Norman Finkelstein. Finkelstein has made a whole career of writing books and making TV appearances on denouncing Israel from the As a Jew perspective. If you've never heard of him, yishkoyach. But all you really have to know is that Norman Finkelstein came to prominence protesting the 1982 Israel-Lebanon war, saying, quote, this son of survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Auschwitz, Majdanek, will not be silent. Israeli Nazis stopped the Holocaust in Lebanon. And he's basically been saying the same thing about Israel nonstop ever since. He's among the prominent Jewish voices calling Israel a supremacist, apartheid state, and that Jews exploit the Holocaust as an ideological weapon to keep Israel immune from criticism. Just an all-around peach of a guy. See, criticizing Israeli policies is one thing, but analogizing Israel to an apartheid state, to Nazis in the Holocaust, is a lie and a blood libel, and therefore anti-Semitism. Yes, even from a Jewish son of Holocaust survivors. And Jews saying anti-Semitic things began millennia ago. In 1238, a French Jewish Talmud scholar named Nicholas Donin was expelled from his yeshiva for espousing Karaite views, basically refusing to recognize the Talmud and rabbinic law as authoritative. So after his expulsion, he went all the way to Rome before Pope Gregory IX and denounced the Talmud as anti-Christian. This act led to the famous Paris Disputation, which Donin participated in, and then subsequently the largest mass burning of the Talmud in recorded history, with approximately 12,000 volumes destroyed in France. Keep in mind that this was before the printing press. These were irreplaceable handwritten volumes of Talmud. We actually still remember this tragic affair every year on Tisha B'Av, our collective day of tragedy and sorrow, and all caused by one angry, alienated Jew. And by the way, if he was hoping for acceptance from Christian Europe for his efforts, Donin never got it. and was ultimately condemned publicly by the Catholic Franciscan order in 1287. That was in a time when anti-Semitism was characterized by hating Jews for their religion. When that went out of fashion, anti-Semitism shape-shifted into hating Jews for their race, which is what characterized Hitler's and Nazi Germany's anti-Semitism. And you might find this shocking, but in his incredible book, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, by the military historian Brian Mark Rigg, he shows through records that more than 100,000 Jews served in the military of the Third Reich, most of whom volunteered. They justified their participation because they saw themselves as secular, high society, educated, not like those poor Eastern European Jews. Or they thought of themselves as merely half Jews, or fully German and not Jewish at all. Apparently, some made it through the war unscathed because it never occurred to anyone to check if they were Jewish in their files. But the ones who were discovered, well, whether you fought for Hitler or not, Hitler saw a Jew as a Jew, and you went to the camps like everybody else. Today, it's not considered appropriate to hate someone for their religion or hate them for their race. But you can hate someone for their political ideology or for their nation state, which brings us to the anti-Semitism of our day and anti-Zionism. Changing the definition of Zionism, with anti-Zionists calling it a political ideology, is also what muddies the waters here. Of course, however, anti-Zionists should not get to define Zionism. Zionists get to define Zionism. You wouldn't ask a rapist to define misogyny, or the Ku Klux Klan to define racism. So why do anti-Zionists, whether they're Jewish or not, get to define Zionism? Zionism is not a political ideology, even though Wikipedia categorizes it such. Zionism is not on the right or on the left. It does not inform how Israel should be governed, or how to manage the war, or what the rules of the Knesset should be. Zionism is simply a movement for the Jewish people to self-determine in their ancestral homeland, the land Jews are indigenous to, the land of Israel, period. As I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of Jewish anti-Zionist voices, but the one who get the lion's share of attention in the media are the so-called progressive Jewish anti-Zionists. But this too is not so new. In 2006, Professor Alvin Rosenfeld from Indiana University wrote a watershed article on this called Progressive Jewish Thought and the New Anti-Semitism. In it, he details how the famous Jewish poet Adrian Rich argued that the word Zionism, quote, is so incendiary, so drenched in ideas of blood and soil, in memories of victimization and pursuant claims of the right to victimize, that it needs to dissolve. Then there's the Jewish British academic Jacqueline Rose, who said, quote, we take Zionism to be a form of collective insanity. And the Jewish American scholar and founder of the eco-socialist movement, Joel Covell, who bluntly wrote that, quote, to be a true Jew, a Jew must annihilate their particularism, annihilate or transcend Zionism, and annihilate the Jewish state. For me, personally, anti-Zionism as a cause to delegitimize Zionism, anti-Zionism as a cause to deny the Jewish people a Jewish state in their ancestral homeland, especially after the Holocaust, especially after October 7th, as a cause to demonize Jews as genocidal Nazis, malevolently denying Palestinians' rights or even a state, as a cause complicit with the Marxist binary worldview that everyone is either an oppressor or the oppressed, as a cause that justifies October 7th as an act of liberation, as a cause that so singly and obsessively focuses on one nation, the Jewish nation, for critique, condemnation, and the application of undeniable double standards, while ignoring the vast human rights violations of dozens of other countries. anti-Zionism as a cause displaying remarkable stupidity by equating what Hamas does with what the Israeli army does. Hamas, which uses Palestinian civilians as human shields, steals humanitarian aid and money, keeps hostages in tunnels and in civilian homes, fires rockets from civilian areas in Gaza at Israeli civilians, which is a double war crime. In all these ways, it is hard for me not to see anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, even when coming from Jews. Is it possible to be an anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic? I guess, technically, semantically speaking, one can technically be an anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic in the same way that one can technically be a Holocaust denier and not be anti-Semitic. It may be technically possible, but once you're in the Holocaust denying business, you're also kind of in the anti-Semitism business. And the same is true of anti-Zionism, because Zionism has been the normative disposition, the hope, the dream of the vast majority of Jews for millennia that came to fulfillment in the middle of the 20th century. And these Jewish anti-Zionists want to take all that away from the Jewish people? To say that this is not a part of Judaism? Unfathomable. The thing about anti-Semitism is that it survives because it mutates and shapeshifts. And right now, Israel is the Jew of the world. And anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism, even when being espoused by Jews themselves. And the reason Jews become anti-Zionists is pretty clear. Anti-Zionism fits into a political package that speaks to their progressive, so-called universal values. And for many American Jews today, their politics is their primary and most important identity. For them, anti-Zionism links to anti-imperialism, anti-racism, anti-colonialization, and for many, anti-capitalism, and we see, for some, anti-America. Jews have done such a good job at capturing and aligning with the universal progressive values in politics, many have forgotten that Judaism also has some very particular values that may not be considered so progressive, with a particular history, and is particularly associated with a particular land. What Jewish anti-Zionists are doing is eliminating the particular aspect of Jewish peoplehood, diminishing the concept of Am Yisrael, and reducing it to a religious faith alone. And this anti-Zionism has already poisoned the Reconstructionist movement. It is infecting a minority, but parts of the Reform movement, and it's even seeped a bit into the conservative movement. And it threatens to rupture American-Jewish-Israel relations, which would be catastrophic for world Jewry. The other thing that I think happens for many Jews is they get terribly uncomfortable with Jewish power. Israel has real power, a real military. And with a military and power and war comes misuse of power. Mistakes happen. Humans, of which Jews are included, during war commit war crimes. In fact, part of training in the Israeli army is to study past war crimes committed by Israelis so that they learn what not to do. A military uniform with an M16 is a powerful and unnerving thing. For example, the great Israeli philosopher Yeshayahu Leibovitz deeply resented the Israeli army and said that for him it signified, quote, the Nazification of Israeli society. But most of us are proud of the Israeli army and how it operates and recognizes its painful necessity. I'll end with this. There are many well-meaning, decent people who are Jewish anti-Zionists. I know quite a few, people I consider friends, even some relatives. And they have some points about several problems in Israel, particularly regarding far-right Jewish nationalism led by Itamar Ben-Gvir. It's true. Israel isn't perfect or always innocent. But in a way, like Korach, they go too far, applying false terms, false equivalencies, and false ideas, lies really, that corrupt their goodness and ultimately warp their points into bile and hatred. That was Korach's problem. He may have had a point, but he went too far and was willing to undermine the whole project. And I'm sorry to say this, but this is a war that we're in. Not just on the fronts in Gaza and Lebanon, but a war of propaganda, a war of morality, a war of conscience, a war of civilizational values. The anti-Zionist leaders need to be shut down. And for the younger Jewish anti-Zionists, well, we need to keep engaging them. But in a war, we lose friends and loved ones. Israelis are losing friends and loved ones in the most fundamental material way. And in my engagement with Jewish anti-Zionists, I am also prepared to lose friends and loved ones, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. But my knowledge, my conscience, my spirit demands me and each and every one of us to be resolute and clear in our moral stance as we confront this ancient, shape-shifting Jew hatred. Shabbat shalom.